Hi, I'm John Mark Young, President and Chief Investment Officer of Whitaker-Myers Wealth Managers, and I'd like to welcome you to another installment of the Whitaker-Myers Wealth Managers What We Learned in the Markets This Week video. Remember, our aim is to provide you, our valued clients, with a brief video giving you information that is helpful to your understanding of the markets from a biblical worldview with no financial agenda, which of course makes us uniquely different from the news media in America. This video is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon to make investment decisions. The clients of Whitaker-Myers Wealth Managers may maintain positions in the securities discussed in today's videos, and all opinions discussed are solely those of John Mark Young and not those of Whitaker-Myers Wealth Managers. So let's talk about the four things we learned in the markets this week, starting with point number one. And point number one is, I feel like the only way to start this week is to proclaim as loudly as possible our support for Israel and the people of Israel. As an investment firm that has a dedicated sleeve of investments made into the Israel economy and the country of Israel, we feel like we have skin in the game from a monetary perspective and an economic perspective. And their economic prosperity in Israel has been vast and consistent, despite the fact that they actually have to run a security state while also trying to drive economic value to their citizens and the world at large. That is not an easy thing to do, to be constantly worried about your security from every side and be strong economically. As a democratic nation, we as a firm stand strong with our brothers and sisters in the only democratic nation in the Middle East. And shame on those protests and all this anti-Israel hate being propagated at many of America's largest universities and colleges, such as Harvard, UCLA, George Mason, Columbia, to name a few. There's more. As I consistently tell our folks on our team, if you are not investing in where you send your children for educational purposes, whether it be pre-K, K through 12, or college, we have some of the greatest Christian colleges and education centers in America, but rather we're sending these to these indoctrination centers we call universities. Well, don't come back and shrug your shoulders and wonder why they come home and question your Judeo-Christian values. You must have school, your church, and your home working together. And when these three work together, then that's where it works. When school gets the most face time with our kids, if that system is not teaching truth, but rather spreading woke culture ideas, many of our children will believe that as truth. The Apostle Paul said in Romans 1:25-27, he said, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creator, the creature, rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Okay, so you don't tune in for my political or religious views. So we'll get on to the markets, but alas, the Hamas invasion of Israel did kick the markets off to a slow start that we quickly regained from, however, from the U.S. stock market perspective. The Israel stock market did not. They dropped about 10% for the week. So they're down pretty good for the week. However, as we'll see in a few minutes, the U.S. stock market was able to hold up a lot better. We held up pretty well, partly because it's earnings season in the U.S. for the U.S. economy. And earnings season, remember, is the opportunity for companies to report how much revenue and profit, expense, that they had over that last quarter. And fundamentally, it's the main reason why a stock will go up or go down. Here you can see on your screen the operating earnings estimate through 2024. Now, operating earnings are just the revenue minus expenses to get to your profit. The expectation is that for the third quarter of 2023, we'll see an earnings increase from $54.84 a share that we saw in the second quarter of this year to $55.27 a share in the third quarter. Okay, so up approximately 50 cents a share. This week, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup each reported a combined $22 billion in profits in the third quarter, and that is an increase of nearly 33%, a third from a year earlier. So no surprise that in a higher interest rate environment, banks are seeing pretty strong earnings growth, which has not been reflected in their stock price, mainly because of multiple compression. And that's, we had the banking crisis in March. That's going to hurt your multiple on the banking side. And impending regulation potentially forcing them to hold higher capital and having higher capital requirements is going to weigh on their ability to see their stock price grow. The only regional bank to report earnings was PNC Financial Services, and things are not so rosy at the regional bank side, at least through PNC. PNC said their profit slipped from a year earlier. It went down, actually, causing them to announce a 4% reduction in their workforce. So they're laying off 4% of their workforce. I heard a lot of people complaining about higher auto insurance premiums lately on Facebook or social media. That led to Progressive announcing their net premiums their net premiums jumped 20% from a year earlier to $15.59 billion. So that's why your insurance went up. And the stock took off this week. So earnings outside of PNC Financial look pretty good at the early onset. Each week, we also track the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now model to get an estimate of how fast our economy is growing. Recent history has seen GDP growth around 2%. This week's reading of the estimate for the third quarter, still looking at the third quarter, is 5.1%, up from 4.9 last week. And that's because the wholesale trade report from the U.S. Census Bureau released on Friday led to the nowcast of third quarter real gross private domestic investment growth and real third quarter government spending growth to increase from 5.9 and 2.2 respectively to 6.7 and 3%. So both of those metrics went up, causing the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now model to say we're going to get a higher look at a GDP. Each week, we also look at the initial claims for unemployment insurance for an early breakdown of the labor market, if it's even happening. This week, they came in at 209,000, so nothing to see here, still at historically low marks. And finally, let's look at the markets this week. The S&P 500, which is our proxy for growth and growth in income, but only when taken together, that was positive 0.45%. The Russell 2000, which tracks smaller and mid-sized companies, or aggressive growth in our Dave Ramsey vernacular, that was negative 1.83% this week. And the MSCI EFA, which tracks our international stocks, that was negative 20 basis points, 0.2% this week, making the second straight week that the S&P 500 has taken the crown for the best weekly performer of the indexes we track. Point number 2, progress, not victory. That is a slogan used when thinking about the September 2023 inflation data that was released this week. The Fed wants to be at 2%, and we're just not getting there, but we certainly are moving far away from the massive numbers we saw in 2022 when we topped out at 9.1% inflation in June of 2022 of last year. On Thursday, we learned that this Consumer Price Index, or CPI, rose 3.7%, and as you can see, that actually matches August data after hitting a bottom in July. So it bounced up after July, not a lot, now it's stayed a little steady. So the downward progression is no longer in effect, unfortunately. We're now in a range, it seems, which could push the Fed to move forward with more rate cuts later in the year, although it doesn't seem at the next meeting they're going to make any rate cuts. Gasoline prices didn't rise as much in September, and that took some pressure off any upward momentum. But now with the possibility of Iran joining a regional conflict with Israel in the Middle East, that could certainly mean sanctions. Hopefully it would mean sanctions on Iran. And that would mean higher oil prices for us as their supply would come offline, putting more upward pressure on inflation. Grocery prices held steady in this last CPI report. So presumably, unless you're eating more, your Kroger bill has stayed steady. And housing, which economists keep telling us will eventually cool off, was another large contributor to inflation in the month of September, adding 0.6% month over month over the prior month. If you don't have your housing costs locked in, you haven't saved your down payment and bought a house, got a mortgage, I do feel horrible for you because you're most likely feeling a lot of pain. That's been the part of inflation that keeps ripping. And finally, if you've been holding off on buying that new used car, it may be time because used car prices have fallen 8% this year after being really bad last year. Point number 3, this is not an investment recommendation, but nearly an observation. Think of it as a what we learned in the markets this week observation that I thought was pretty darn interesting. So gold and silver have rallied this week since the start of the Israel and Hamas war, while the prices of Bitcoin and Ethereum have dropped by almost equal amounts. Now, why is this? That's interesting. The cryptocurrencies down, gold and silver up, perhaps because of a Wall Street Journal article from this week titled, Militants Boosted Holdings of Bitcoin Over the Past Year. And reviewing the article, you'll learn that these Middle East terrorist groups have received well over $100 million in virtual currencies in the last year. We have basically made it impossible for them to use our global financial system, and that's good, but this virtual currency idea of an unregulated asset that can be freely moved around the world, turns out we actually need the governments. Governments can do some good. When left to our own devices without the help of government, which is cryptocurrency, we give these animals access to millions upon millions of dollars, and we can't stop it. We're helpless to stop it. So why the price drop in the last 5 days of Bitcoin and Ethereum? Well, this is just a sign that the industry of cryptocurrency needs a lot more regulation before a mainstream investment product like an ETF will ever be rolled out for the public to start using this in a meaningful way. I would certainly not be adding to gold or virtual currencies considering this recent news. And point number 4, on a lighter note, finally, NASA has just announced it's going to build a house on the moon. They're building a house on the moon. What does this mean for investing? Well, it probably means stick with my guy at Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk, because this is more NASA, but NASA has massive contracts with SpaceX. Their plan is to build a house on the moon by 2040 for not only their astronauts' use, but also for general public use. Now, how will they do this? Are they going to send builders up there? No, they're actually going to send a enormous 3D printer to the moon, and that printer will build the structure layer by layer from rock chips, mineral fragments, and dust that sits on the moon's surface, just as we used to build homes on Earth in our early days. How we do it? We build it from rocks, stick, dirt, all that stuff, and we're going to start that way on the moon. Isn't it kind of how it comes full circle? And it just goes to show the innovation in the American economy, why you have to be invested. Think about that. Think about that. We're sending an unmanned object to the moon that's going to use parts of the moon to build a house that people can inhabit on the moon, of which there's no air, there's no gravity. Just how are we able to do this? That's innovation. In innovation, you might say, well, what's the point of that? Well, probably for some climate people, they just love the idea of that because it's, we're going to destroy the Earth, so let's go live on the moon. But think about the heart of that from an investment perspective. An economy that can do that, that can send something like that to the moon and build a house without a person being there, that's an economy that you want to invest in. That's an economy that's going to do great things beyond just building a house on the moon that may or may not have any sort of utility in the future. If at anything, it's a new vacation destination, perhaps. But that same economy is the one that's trying to cure cancer and getting close. And that's the same economy that's trying to cure hunger across the world. You know that a lot of our produce is now grown in a factory up instead of vertical. That's the U.S. economy innovation. That's why you want to be invested. That's why you want to be invested, in our opinion, 75% in the U.S. economy through growth in income, and aggressive growth types of investments. Because that economy is going to do great things until the Lord tarries for however long. And that's economy is going to help you create the financial security you need and make a kingdom impact that you want to make. So thanks so much for watching this video. If this video was helpful to you, would you do us a favor? You can do us a favor by hitting the like button. When you hit the like button, you actually help us with Google and YouTube and Rumble's algorithms, because their algorithms say if you watch the video and you don't like the video, then we don't like the video, thus we don't show the video to the next person watching a video on YouTube. So hitting that like button really helps us push our content out to more people, as well as when you hit the subscribe button. The subscribe button allows our content to get to you as quickly as possible. You get a nice little notification on your iPhone or Google Pixel or whatever you have when we put out any new content, whether it's our question of the week video or what we learned in the markets or the topical things we do from time to time. So thanks so much. And if you would like to meet with any of our financial coaches or advisors, our coaches help you in baby steps 1, 2, and 3, get out of debt, stay out of debt, and build a budget that they will hold you accountable to, or our financial planners who help you in baby steps 4, 5, and 6, save for retirement, save for your kids' college, and or think through a plan to pay off your house so that you can live and give like no one else. And that grass, when you pay off that house, feels different. Thanks so much. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.